With some reluctance, I said to Nancy, James's wife, I need to go back to my hometown for a while. Can you watch over my house while I'm away? She said disrespectfully, you don't have to come back at all, even if you're my husband's mother. I don't want to live with some stranger, some old lady. Seriously, whose house does she think this is? Besides, it's too big for Linda to live in. All right, we'll take care of it, so don't worry. We'll change the locks, so it won't matter if you come back. Too bad, ever since I moved in with James and Nancy, her behavior has been terrible. I've had enough. Fine, I won't come back here anymore. Really? Yes, really. Just do whatever you want from now on. Even James is unaware of the hidden aspect that I, Linda, am hiding. If Nancy found out, what would she think about it? I gathered my belongings quietly and headed out of the house. I go by Linda. Since my husband, Thomas, passed away 3 years ago, I have been living alone. I married Thomas, a 57-year-old coworker, when I was barely 24 years old. Despite our lack of wealth, we had spirit. We were, after all, impressionable and full of hope. I found out shortly after we were married that I was pregnant, and the following year I gave birth to James. I pushed myself into work and raising our child after my maternity leave. Although we considered having another child, our financial situation prevented us from doing so. Even though Thomas came from an affluent family, he steadfastly refused their assistance. His father and he didn't get along well, and he almost ran away from home. James, who is just as serious-minded as his father, may have been stubborn enough to graduate from college and land a job at a famous corporation. He was well-respected and accomplished in his career, but he struggled in his personal life and remained unmarried well into his 30 years of age. We tied the knot young, full of vigor, but it seemed we didn't follow in our parents' footsteps in that regard. Thomas would constantly ask, James, when will I get to meet my grandkid? It was unusual to encounter someone in their 30s with no dating history like James, even though our marriage could have been young. People in our era were often telling stories about their weekend partners. It was a more carefree time in retrospect. Thomas had been waiting impatiently for James to settle down, but he died unexpectedly 2 years ago, without witnessing it occur. He suffered a heart attack, and by the time he got to the hospital, it was already too late. I stayed at home and quit my work because I was so sad. Fortunately, Thomas's insurance paid for the remaining portion of the mortgage, and I had my retirement funds, so money wasn't an urgent problem. Our freshly constructed home, which we bought when we were almost 30, was filled with recollections of Thomas. James and I decided to give me Thomas's share after he passed away. It was not practicable to divide the house, and my intention was to eventually give it to James. I was shocked to hear him admit, out of the blue, I found someone I wanted to marry, when I brought up the topic with him. I meant to tell you, but the right moment never seemed to come. Sorry. It was ironic that Thomas, who had been looking forward to James's marriage, was no longer with us. What? You had a girlfriend? Why keep it from me? Dad was waiting all this time. James brought his boyfriend to our place the following weekend. Mom, let me introduce you to Nancy. Nice to meet you, Nancy, she remarked, her flashy clothing looking out of place for James, who had up until that point led a serious life. You seem cheerful and kind, don't you? I said nonetheless, believing that if James had picked her, she must have a decent personality despite her appearance. Nancy took a quick look around our house, examining everything. I was a little nervous. I said to Nancy, Are you okay? You seem to be thinking a lot. Oh, nothing. Just taking it all in. So, this is where James grew up. By the way, Mom, there's something else I'd like to discuss, James said. What is it? James proposed skipping the wedding ceremony and just registering the marriage since his one-bedroom apartment was too small. He asked if they could live with me. I said, I don't mind, but are you comfortable with that, Nancy, while secretly rejoicing at the prospect of not being by myself in this large mansion ever since Thomas's death. Nancy was slightly irritated, but it was brief. Nancy, Are you okay with staying here for a moment? She quickly responded with a smile, saying, Of course. I've always dreamed of living in a house rather than an apartment. See, Mum? Nancy agrees, so please, how could I refuse, my dear James's requests? Plus, I had my own worries about living alone. Having the young couple around would liven up the house and perhaps eventually bring grandchildren. I hoped this would gradually fill the void left by Thomas's absence. I accepted their arrangement, saying, It's okay, James. This is your home, and Nancy, please treat it as yours. But I found Nancy's sporadic insulting remarks bothersome. Upon moving in together, my misgivings were validated. While we were still unpacking, Nancy said, Linda, I'm quite busy, so could you handle all the meals and cleaning? And the bath preparations, too, please? Pretty please? I put up with her treating me like a maid, but only because I wanted to keep James and his wife happy. However, a single person's labor in managing a household differs greatly from that of an adult. Why can't she do it herself if she's so particular? I couldn't even contain my annoyance. Linda, my lingerie is delicate, so be sure to handle and wash it. I therefore waited for a chance to speak with James when Nancy wasn't around. I had to bring it up abruptly, not wanting to upset him. Hey, James, could you maybe suggest to Nancy to share some of the housework? When I broached the topic, Nancy's never really done any housework, but she appreciates how meticulously you handle things, Mom, he responded. James seemed to be trying to patch things up between Nancy and myself, saying, Anyhow, I'll talk to her about it. Let's try to get along, okay? Nancy's attitude towards me continued to worsen after that. Why isn't our room tidy? There's dust everywhere. Can't you clean your own space? There might be things we don't want touched. What are you implying, Linda? You're such a homemaker, always at home, right? It's like you're vying for James. Can you at least pitch in with the housework? I murmured, feeling the buildup of resentment I had put up with everything because Nancy was James's wife and looked after the two of them. If anyone's leeching off James, it's me. Nancy's the one draining the life out of this place. But one day, I reached my breaking point. My sister gave me a call. My sister and brother were married and we were all grown-ups, leaving our parents' house alone. My mom went away a few years ago, she lived alone, and my dad died when I was in school. We listed the house for sale since we didn't want to leave it unoccupied, and we eventually found a buyer. We had our parents' house to tidy up. I may have ended up alone too if James and his wife hadn't come to be with me. However, if Nancy persists like this, I won't be able to take it anymore. It might be wise to give it a rest. That evening, after Nancy had gotten out of the bath, I approached her because James was away on a business trip. With hesitation, I said, Can we talk? She said sluggishly, It might be something annoying I don't want to hear. I need to go back to my parents' house for a while. It might be for some time. So I need you to look after the house and about the housework during that time. She yelled angrily, You're not expecting me to do it, are you? I nudged her to ask, Looks like that's the plan. What do you think? This is your family home, right? You don't have to come back. I mean, it was nice that you did so much, but I hated living with some old lady who's practically a stranger. This is perfect. Nancy's rudeness, thinking James wasn't around, was blatant. Sure, it's a bit old-fashioned, but this house is too big for just you, right? We'll make use of it. So don't worry. Maybe we should change the locks, then you can't get in even if you come back, she said casually. I was taken aback. She was taking care of James and me, so I put up with her behavior. But I was at my breaking point. Got it. I won't be coming back. So do as you please. I went back to my room and started packing, not only for this trip but also to make things easy for the movers. Really? Are you serious? Yay! When the moment came and I secreted an envelope inside my trunk, I realized it was something I had to have. I left the house the following morning, with a lot of bags and memories, and I wrote to my parents. I hired movers to take my stuff, which would be kept in storage until I found a new home. As I strolled along the well-traveled path, I could make out my parents' house in the distance. Because my close sister regularly maintained it, even though it was vacant, it looked reasonably well kept. My sister and brother and I went through all the house, cleaning every nook and cranny, and reminiscing. It was difficult to keep an empty property up to date, so it made the most sense to sell it. I took the envelope out of my trunk and called the number listed for the real estate agent. Since the house's utilities were cut off, we stayed at a nearby motel while we cleaned. I was excited to take a shower when I got back to my hotel room on the third day of tidying. My phone kept buzzing, but I ignored it and dove into the lake. However, I paid attention to the cries that persisted. Looking through the call log, I saw that Nancy's phone was used for every missed call. Get another call from Nancy flickered on the screen as I glanced at it. I deliberately used a specific tone, saying something like, "Hey, what's up? Why the constant calls despite knowing the reason?" "So, the movers whisked away all your stuff yesterday, but you're not seriously considering leaving for good, are you?" I replied with a hint of malice. "What do you mean? Weren't you the one who said don't come back, or have you conveniently forgotten? You old hag, Linda, you're our maid, so come back right now." Telling someone to leave and then return felt a little self-serving. "Sorry, but I'll pass." Perhaps, fuming, Nancy even referred to me as a maid. "Oh, I forgot to mention I'm planning to rent out that house, and I've already contacted a real estate agent. So, Nancy, you'll need to find a new place soon." "What do you mean? You can't just do that." "We're living here," Nancy said, her voice trembling slightly, maybe from confusion. "I own that house, like you said. It's too big for one person. I've been contemplating renting it out for some time to boost my income. Unless you and James want to become tenants, that's fine by me." Nancy seemed to have misinterpreted. "You greedy old woman, are you that desperate for money?" she asked. "But I'm not strapped for cash. Fortunately, I have other properties. They generate income for me, so I'm financially secure. I just saw this as an opportunity to straighten things out. The deeds to my properties were in the package I carried from the house. I had been given them by Thomas in case of an emergency. They belonged to Thomas's father at first and were given to him after his parents died. Thomas had not told me about this, and it was only in his will, written prior to his death, that I learned about these possessions. I had meant to tell James about this bit by bit over time, but Nancy becoming his wife dissuaded me entirely. Nancy's voice reverberated with pain. "Then make arrangements for us to stay here. You're the landlord, right? That's why I said if you two pay rent, there shouldn't be an issue, right?" After saying, "That's enough. I'll explain everything to James when he returns from his business trip," she cut the phone short. I wondered what she could tell James. James called a few days later. "Hi, Mum. You vacated the house, and now you're asking us to leave too. But isn't this our family home? I simply mentioned I had matters to attend to and requested you to house sit. But Nancy insisted I shouldn't return, and I couldn't bear it any longer. What are we supposed to do?" I informed Nancy about my plan to rent out the place. "So all you need to do is pay rent if that's feasible." After I finished speaking, James stopped talking. "It's true that I recently changed jobs," James said straight up. "Since when?" "Just before our wedding. I haven't disclosed this to Nancy." I felt uneasy. "Shouldn't you inform your partner about your intentions to marry first? Why keep her in the dark?" He said that Nancy was happy to learn he worked for a prestigious corporation when they first started dating. James had not dated much until he was 30 years old, and he did not have the confidence to tell the first woman he thought about marrying the truth. "I'm now working at a startup I established with some college buddies, and it seems we're on the brink of success. Mom, please lend me your support." James, who had no siblings, came to me for help. I wanted to be there for James, but as an adult and a married man, he had to take accountability. If he didn't come clean and ask his partner for forgiveness, life would only get harder. "James, you're able to handle your own affairs. After you've done that, I'll help as much as I can as your parent. Do you understand? I said, feeling a little harsh, and decided to speak with them both again a week after getting back to my family's house and finishing the decluttering. I gave my brother and sister kudos for their efforts. Well done. I said, let's arrange to get together again when we have more time, with the intention of heading back home. Linda, howdy, and welcome back. As soon as I got home, Nancy said, I've been expecting you. Notice you didn't change the locks. Have you changed your mind? I shot back with a hint of sarcasm. Where's James at this time? Is he not present here? James came out the rear, obviously exhausted. Did you appropriately converse with Nancy? I asked, and Nancy seemed to have no idea. James said, it seems you haven't told her, revealing that he had quit his work to launch a venture capital firm with a friend. Is that everything? Because you were a promising employee at a prestigious company, I consented to marry you. Nancy abruptly disclosed her genuine sentiments to James, saying, if it weren't for that, I wouldn't have bothered with a gloomy guy like you. That's how Nancy really feels, then. I thought we were getting along with Mom, but Nancy, you were just using her as a replacement cleaner, so in that case, we have no choice but to terminate this, James sighed as he stated. I mean, this old hag is only good for housework? Nancy spoke in a harsh way. How on earth could you talk to Mom that way? Would you please just go? I even no longer want to see your face. Neither do I need this. You remember how you tricked me? Nancy vowed to take legal action against you and then bounded out of the house. Are you certain that this choice is the best one? I inquired. It's all right. Nancy never really cared for me from the beginning, James said, but his expression conveyed the resentment of a man who felt deceived. Later, James and Nancy concluded their divorce. Nancy claimed that James had concealed information about his job change and that he had seen Alomi. On the other hand, it turned out that Nancy had resigned from her position and was meeting in secret with a lover during the day. This resulted in a settlement where the parties shared the suffering. It sounded like sensible people, and I found out that Nancy had a strained relationship with them. I wanted some recompense for the verbal abuse and being treated like a maid, but I didn't want to stir up trouble, so I let it slide. I heard Nancy rush back to her parents' house in tears, only to be reprimanded by them for her calculated marriage and divorce. Eventually, Nancy, who is unwanted at home, is barely making ends meet by working multiple part-time jobs. Maybe I'm just a bad judge of character, but I think I'm done with marriage. It's just too much hassle, James said, half jokingly and half seriously. We moved out of the original house as scheduled, and James and I are now living apart. But among the inherited property, I discovered a decent one, and we are now each residing on it. I decided to invest in James's business and sell off some of the properties, which some may consider expensive. I decided to trust James's earnest request to commit himself fully to his endeavor. Maybe he should wait to get married till his business stabilizes. All I can do as his mother is hope that at the appropriate moment, he meets the right person.